Ducks and chicks and geese better scurry when I take you out in the Surrey with the death on top. Hello and welcome to Rotted Review of the Day, and today I am taking a look at the 1921 silent film from Sweden, The Phantom Carriage. Now, this is not coming from an academic point of view. A lot of times when people start reviewing or talking about or making YouTube videos about films this old, it is from an academic point of view, from a film studies class kind of thing, and that's not what this channel is about. I had never seen this movie before, but to be perfectly honest, today is December 26th, and I had just gotten done with the advent calendar of Christmas movies. I'd seen 25 Christmas horror movies, and I was in the mood for something that would not be at all cute. I was tired of things, winking at the camera and playing to the audience, and I wanted something dreadful and serious, and this was highly rated, so I decided to give it a whirl. So this review is just coming from the standpoint of a layman that loves horror films and is reviewing it in the same spirit and criteria as I do Nightmare on Elm Street 3. So here we go. Pretty much how I felt about this one was I was very pleasantly surprised with how beautiful it was, how haunting it was. The morality tale behind it was kind of interesting. But to get into more detail of this, let's get into the categories. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And the plot of this one followed, it started with a character that was a worker or a nurse for the Salvation Army, and she is on her deathbed. She has galloping consumption, tuberculosis in other words, and she is been fighting it, and she is on her last hours, and she calls out for David Holm to come to her side. And then you get introduced to the character of David Holm as one of 3 drunkards that are hanging out in a cemetery as they tell the story about the Phantom Carriage. The premise of that being that the last person to die on New Year's Eve as the clock strikes is commissioned to drive the carriage for death and pick up souls that have passed away over the course of the year until the mantle is passed. And it's an arduous, grueling, thankless process wherein every day feels like 100 years. It's basically put to hellacious servitude. And when David Holm finds that this nurse is calling for him to join her by her deathbed, he refuses for reasons that are unknown, and in doing so gets into a scuffle and winds up becoming fatally injured as the clock struck, and thereby having the carriage come to him and explain to him that the mantle is indeed passing to him. And it kind of goes on to a little bit of a Dickens Christmas Carol kind of feel to it after that, just kind of introducing why those 2 characters knew each other, why this nurse and David Holm knew each other, going into the history of the marriage that he had abandoned and or basically lost to the drink, and the history behind them. And it really just kind of turns into a tragic, romantic, haunting tale as the torches slowly passed to him becoming the driver of the carriage. This was really a beautiful narrative. It was told through fractured segments of storytelling, and I really, really enjoyed that approach. It caused things to be slightly confusing at first. The nurse was calling for David Holm, and you had no idea who that was, what the relationship was. She started talking about he's the man I love, but it starts out very confusing, but all the gaps do get filled in nicely, and the way that it uncovers each element of it to ultimately get to the point of the full storyline, I thought was just really beautifully told. Again, this is terribly, terribly tragic. It is heart-wrenching and heartbreaking watching the characters go through what they go through in such a just a macabre way. And it's almost Shakespearean in the levels of tragedy that it explores. And if I had to give any kind of marks against it, I would say that it is guilty of holding back at the last minute, when really it felt like all the tone up until that point should have continued on to its final conclusion, its logical and natural conclusion. But ultimately, I do love this movie. And from a writing standpoint, it was fantastic. So 21 out of 25 points for the written plot. The intent, I gave an 18 out of 25. As a morality tale with strong characters, haunting visuals, this was an absolute resounding success. But as a not-so-subtle warning to the audience, a morality tale being told through the screen, Reefer Madness style, warning of the dangers of drink and of sin and so forth, I felt that I could see where they were coming from, but achieving its intention, it perhaps back in the day. Perhaps if I had been sitting in the theater in 1921 watching this, then it would have had a dramatic impact upon my life and so forth. But as it stands now, it's simply a piece of cinematic art that I enjoy watching, and that's it. So as far as influencing me, I would say that it did not, and I really, really feel like that was a portion of its intention. So I can't really say that it succeeded on that level. But as a tale being told, as a story being unfolded, and as a piece of art, it was wonderful. And all the emotions that it set out to elicit, I feel that it achieved that. So 18 out of 25. The acting, I gave a 22 out of 25. This was surprisingly detailed and rich. For being a silent film and not being able to vocally express itself, the characters and the actors that portray them. And I am not going to do this movie the disservice of even attempting to pronounce the names. Suffice it to say, the actors that did play the nurse and David Holm and David Holm's wife were just amazing. The amount of emotion that they allowed to have come through, the actor that played David Holm especially, was just fantastic. It was so expressive. Every level of it, from joy to guilt to joyous guilt to complete sorrow, every aspect of his performance especially really, really shone through and gut punched me in a way that I don't think I'll ever really forget. Considering that we couldn't hear a single word being spoken, everything about this spoke volumes. The technical, I gave a 22 out of 25 as well. The double exposure shots, which had the Phantom Carriage and them incorporating themselves into the world in a bit of an apparition state, was beautiful. The way that they achieved that on a technical level and to the effect that it did was just gorgeous. And beyond that, just the way everything was shot and the lighting, the way that it played with shadows and highlighted the actors' faces and dimmed the backgrounds, whether it was purposeful or not, it was just wonderful. And that gives us a total score of 83 out of 100 points. Now, I am not going to claim that this movie is a tour de force of action or a pants pooper of a scary movie, but it is a genuinely haunting tale that is told beautifully and is 100% worth watching. I recommend this movie to anybody, especially horror film lovers. This is a great notch to have on the belt of your cinematic library. This is a really great one to have seen, and I think it's shown some light on influences that come through in more modern cinema, and on that basis alone, I recommend watching it. So that should about do it. That's my review for the 1921 silent film from Sweden, The Phantom Carriage. I really thank you for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.